So something pretty strange seems to be happening down in Florida. You've got state officials talking about a huge tourist season, but then you hear from people actually on the ground, and they're telling a completely different story. So what is really going on in the Sunshine State? Let's dig in and find out.
I mean, look at this. On one side, you have the official tourism agency, Visit Florida, saying everything's great, tourism is strong. And on the other, you have reports from places like Anna Maria Island calling it an absolute ghost town. How can both of these things be true at the same time?
And that's the central question here, isn't it? To get to the bottom of this, we're going to have to look at all the pieces of this puzzle. The official data, what eyewitnesses are saying, and, a few other unexpected curveballs.
All right, first up, let's look at the evidence the state is putting forward. This is their side of the story, and it's all built around the numbers.
So here's the headline number from Visit Florida for the third quarter of 2025. It's a modest but still positive 0.3% increase in total visitors. On the surface, you look at that and think, okay, that's growth. Case closed, right?
Well, not so fast. Because when you start to dig into that same report, a much more complicated picture starts to emerge. There's a really key detail that kind of changes everything.
And here it is. During that same time, the number of Canadian tourists, the snowbirds, absolutely plummeted by 15%. That is a huge drop. So, how in the world did overall tourism still go up?
Well, this chart right here explains how they can still be so optimistic. See, Canadians only make up a tiny slice of the tourism pie. The huge majority are domestic visitors from right here in the U.S. So even a tiny increase in American tourists was enough to paper over that massive drop from Canada. And the state's leadership, they've pretty much just brushed off any concerns about it. Governor Ron DeSantis basically said that, hey, when it comes down to it, Florida's weather is always going to win out. Who'd want to be up north, in the cold, right?
Okay, so that's the official story, backed by their numbers. Now, let's totally switch gears and look at the view from the ground where, a completely different narrative is playing out.
Now, this quote comes from a YouTuber down on Anna Maria Island. He's showing these empty streets and beaches right in the middle of what should be their busiest time, and he says it's even quieter than the summer off-season. I mean, that is a massive warning sign for local businesses who depend on that winter money.
But here's where it gets interesting. He actually pulls up live traffic data, and what he finds shows a really important detail. While his area, the Tampa Bay area, is dead, cities on the East Coast like Miami are actually bustling. So this points to a really big divide depending on where you are in the state.
He also points out another huge clue. A ton of businesses are still closed down, just never rebuilt after past hurricanes. And that suggests the problem isn't just a lack of tourists, but maybe a lack of places for them to even go.
And this brings us to some of those other big factors, the real wild cards in this whole story. It really does look like Florida's 2026 season got hit by like a perfect storm of extreme weather and the lingering effects of hurricane recovery.
I mean, just look at this weather whiplash in Miami. This is nuts. In just 5 days, the city went from a record high of 84 degrees down to a chilly plunge into the mid-40s. That is a wild swing, and it happened right in the middle of peak tourist season.
And it wasn't just Miami. Oh no, Central Florida got hit with actual freeze warnings. Temperatures just tanked way below normal. It got so cold that Disney World, Disney, had to close its Typhoon Lagoon water park. That directly messes with the whole reason people go there.
I think this quip from journalist Mark Caputo just sums up the whole mood perfectly. When you're dealing with weather that feels so un-Florida, it just throws everything off for tourists and locals alike. It kind of undermines the one thing the state is supposed to guarantee, sunshine.
And we can't forget about those long-term problems. This is a release from the Florida Senate, and it shows the state is still trying to deal with the fallout from the 2024 hurricane season. This totally backs up what that YouTuber was seeing on the ground. Recovery is a slow process, and it's still hurting the tourism industry.
Okay, so we've got the official data, we've got the reality on the ground, and we've got these major external factors. Now, let's try to put all these pieces together and see what the full picture actually looks like. The truth is, there is no simple answer here. The official data, it's technically true, but it's also pretty misleading because it masks those specific declines. The experience on the ground is very real, but it's completely different depending on what part of the state you're in. And on top of it all, you have this crazy weather and the slow recovery from past disasters.
So yeah, this isn't a simple story of boom or bust. It's way more complex. It's a story about deep regional divides, a big dose of bad luck with the weather, and these really tough long-term challenges.
And all of this really leads to a much bigger question for the future, doesn't it? For decades, Florida's entire tourism model has been built on one promise: sunshine. But as that becomes less of a guarantee and as the state faces all these new pressures, you have to ask, is its most important industry actually built to last?